Okay.
Borrow the mic from you.
So thank you everybody for coming, and thank you again for masking and social distancing. I really appreciate it. It's so nice to see everybody again, even if we're only seeing half your faces. The reason I wanted to have Seattle Police here was because I wanted everyone to be more prepared and to feel more safe and to understand statistics and sort of how to use them, that kind of thing. So they'll be doing a presentation and then I'll have time for questions. And so we've got Jennifer Danner, welcome her, please. She's a crime prevention coordinator, and we've got Officer, is it Officer?
Yes.
Officer Matthew Roberson. So thank you so much both for being here, and I'm going to let you take it away.
Thank you so very much, Alan. Hi, everybody. Again, my name is Jennifer Danner. I'm a crime prevention coordinator with SPD. Yes, I apologize. We're going to try to get into the camera view here. So thank you all for spending a little time with us today. We're going to talk a little bit about personal safety and some other resources that SPD has available. And we're looking forward to our presentation today. Just a couple housekeeping items. If you have questions, please feel free to raise your hand and let us know as we go. But we'll also have time at the end as well. So whether you want to ask it in the moment or at the end, it's up to you. Just let us know. Any other housekeeping items before we get started, do you think?
I think that's okay.
All right, perfect. Well, thank you, Alan, for our introduction. I'll give Officer Roberson a chance to introduce himself a little further as well. I've been with SPD for about 7 years, and my role with SPD, I'm a civilian, so I'm not an officer like Officer Roberson. I don't have a gun and a badge and all the fancy stuff, but I specifically focus on crime prevention and community outreach. So my goal is to help you to not be a victim of crime. That's my whole job, is to try to help you to be safe and to not ever have to need to call somebody like Officer Roberson, okay?
Perfect. So thank you for having us out. As Jennifer said, I'm Officer Matthew Roberson. I've worked as a police officer for about 9 years now, and the last few years I've been doing outreach work. So I've been able to be fortunate enough to work a lot with kids, families, and on a lot of prevention and intervention strategies with people like Jennifer. So I think I've been really excited to come out to some of these talks because there hasn't been a lot of opportunity for officers and people to kind of like ask questions, you know, see what's going on, what are the concerns, and kind of come up with maybe strategies that we can do together as residents, you know, living in the city, to kind of address some of the concerns that are coming up. So today as we go, there'll be some things that we can practice, that we can incorporate into our everyday lives to start you know, making some incremental improvements. So I'll pass it back to Jennifer and we'll get started.
All right, so overall today we have a couple training goals for you. So first we're going to talk about our instincts and how our gut reactions play a role in our day-to-day lives. We're going to talk a little bit about discovering potentially dangerous situations and how we might avoid them altogether. We're going to talk about how to make a safety plan, identifying safety tips by specific location and activity, and really overall our umbrella goal is to decrease your odds of being a victim of crime. We're going to focus mostly on what we call person crime, which is sort of our physical safety, right? Our bodily safety. So things like assault, rape, homicide. Those are the kind of things we're going to talk about preventing. But we'll also talk a little bit about property crime prevention too. So how we keep our stuff safe, right?
All right, and so as we go throughout this today, we really want to stress that these are things that we want to start thinking about in a level of increasing our awareness, but not creeping over into the area that we call like paranoia. So not necessarily thinking, hey, every time I go out, something bad is going to happen. But really what we're trying to do is talking about ways to be like aware of our surroundings, recognize things before they happen, and to, you know, even have like a few things that maybe we've thought of ahead of time or we practice ahead of time, so that when we're presented with these choices in these you know, sometimes very stressful situations, we have something that we can quickly fall back on. That's not the first time we've done it. And so Jennifer, do you want to give your plug about?
Sure.
Okay.
We kind of joke that, ladies and gentlemen, if you are leaving today feeling more paranoid than when you arrived, Officer Roberson and I did something wrong, okay? So please come up to us afterwards and say, oh my gosh, Jen and Matt, something's wrong. Let us know, please. Hopefully the goal is to have you leave here feeling more empowered and more safe in your surroundings after we talk today. Does that sound pretty good?
Yeah.
All right, cool. Okay, so I like to start with this little image, and you may have heard of this before, but this is called the triangle of crime. And basically what this is it's showing us that we have to have all three sides of the triangle in order for a crime to occur, right? We have to have the means, we have to have the motive, and we have to have an opportunity. Now, as a potential victim, the only thing we can control is whether we give someone else the opportunity to commit a crime against us. We do not control whether they have the means or whether they have the motive, but we can only control whether we give them that opportunity. And I like to talk about this in the beginning because I think it makes it a little less overwhelming to try to think about preventing someone else's motive or someone else's means, right? We can only control what we do. So we'll talk about that as we keep going along.
All right, and then another thing we like to kind of highlight as we go, a color code system. And I think it's just easy for us to refer back to color codes as we're talking about situations and levels of awareness. So as far as white, that is basically unaware, like daydreaming state. We're in our room, relaxing, reading a book, watching TV, the door is locked. This is good to have. We need to have times of the day where we calm down, let our bodies relax, and kind of be in this, this tranquil state. But as we're leaving the safety of like our homes, we need to have a heightened level of awareness, and so that's what we're going to refer to as a condition yellow. So this is constantly aware and assessing what's going on around you. So if we're walking, right, we're kind of keeping our eyes on a swivel, looking for things that potentially could I guess, be detrimental, or it could just be something else happening. But we're just really being aware. And so we're going to move that from yellow into orange. And so this is the alarm state. So if we're walking around, something did catch our attention, and we're processing it and say, hey, something about this is not right. So we want to start planning. So making some simple plans to act, like, what am I going to do if this thing does this, right? What are my options right now? Is anybody else with me? Does anybody else see what's happening? Do I have a phone to make a call if I want, right? These are some of the things that we're thinking in condition orange. We're starting to weigh our options and kind of take a scope of what's going on around. And this will move into condition red. So this is where we're actually putting our plans into action, right? So whatever we saw that alerted us, we thought of some plans, and now we have to do it, right? So is this something that there was a collision, right? And we need to maybe render aid, call for somebody else. What options do we have? In condition red, this can be a wide variety of things, but it really depends on your situation. But if we've had a good plan, we can usually put this into action quicker, and that's what we want to do, to be able to react and act quick. But there's also another one that we'll refer to condition black. And so this is kind of like a blind panic. This is like a freeze type of thing, like deer in headlights. Thinking is not working. We're not really able to do very much of anything. And we want to get out of this as soon as we can. But this is something to be said at this point, that condition black is something that happens. And you shouldn't be like ashamed of yourself if you go into this, because it's a natural state. So when we're really surprised or we don't know what to do, sometimes we revert to this. And so this is kind of like a freeze mentality. It's something humans have. And so as we go throughout here, we're going to talk about these conditions and some other scenarios and how we can kind of operate through those a little faster and smoother.
All right, so our first piece of homework. Is everybody ready for our first piece of homework? Has anybody ever read this book before? Yeah? Did you enjoy it?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah? That's wonderful. Back here, did you enjoy it as well? Excellent. So our first piece, y'all back here? Excellent. I got 3 in the room, that's pretty great. So first piece of homework is if you have not read this book before, I highly recommend that you write down this title and get the book. So this book is called The Gift of Fear. It's written by Gavin DeBecker. If you've never heard of him before, he was actually Oprah's head of security back in the day. I'm not sure if he still is, but he was on Oprah's talk show many, many times when I was young. But really this book focuses on trusting our instincts. And Gavin DeBecker wants us to retrain our brains into thinking about fear as a positive thing. Now I think often as humans, and especially as a woman, I think that we often kind of think of fear as something to be ashamed of, or we feel silly, right? We think, oh, that's a silly feeling, I'm gonna just ignore that or explain it away. But Gavin DeBecker really wants us to think about fear as our body's way of telling us something that our brain hasn't processed yet. So our body is feeling fear, we need to listen to that feeling, get out of the situation we're in, and then later maybe debrief and understand what happened to us. And I have a little quote on the slide here that just says, "It's okay to know without knowing why." And Gavin DeBecker says, it's okay to know that something's wrong in this moment and I need to change what's happening to me, and then later maybe I can understand that. Any thoughts on trusting your instincts, Officer Roberson?
I haven't read, I've read a little bit of this book, but I do want to kind of, I can try to tie it into the next slide.
You can get it from the library.
Yes,
Yeah.
thank you so very much.
Yes, you can also get this from the library, Seattle Public Library. It's great, I order all sorts of stuff from there.
You mean the Hartstone Library? No, no.
The Seattle
The
Public.
regular library, right? Okay, got it. Or maybe you guys have it here, I don't know. So yeah, maybe it's something that we can talk to Alan about, and maybe we can get a copy over here. So what I want to talk about a little bit, and then maybe I'll tie this back into Gavin DeBecker's book, is like a plan, right? So I kind of introduced this. We're talking about this in like the condition orange. So something like a running game plan that we're doing. So this is those what if scenarios, right? Like what if this occurs in front of me? What if I'm a victim of this? Or what if I'm seeing these things in front of you? What do I do? Like what do I revert back to? So like me, when I was younger, I was like, well, if somebody tries to get me on the way to school, I'm gonna run away, right? And that was my plan. And that's basically the only plan I really had. But what we want to do is kind of just weigh like simple plans depending on where you are and that kind of fit your situation. So if you're making a plan that you can't actually carry out, that's probably not a great plan. We want to keep them simple. So not a 7-step, parts A, B, C, and then you get to D and it falls apart and then you don't know what to do. Because we're going to get into that condition black at that state. Like, hey, my plan fell apart. What do I do next, right? Simple plans that we can execute, things that you've hopefully practiced, those are the best plans, right? We've thought about it once before, maybe we practice it, and those are really good plans. And we kind of go into this last part where we're talking about action versus reaction. So to me, that means if I am reacting to something, I'm usually a little bit behind the 8 ball, right? So I want to, as best as I can, already be putting things into action. So like I've already been aware, I've thought of things, so as soon as possible I can be acting. And I don't have to take time to process new things and react to something somebody else is trying to do to me, if that's one of those kind of situations. Other examples of like what if planning could be, like I've told like biking stories. I used to bike in the city a lot. I don't do it that much anymore, but I have to always be thinking about what are all these cars around me going to do. Stop suddenly, decide to just turn without doing turn signals, all sorts of things like that. And I think for me personally, I've been trying to think of like situations that I've needed to like listen to my gut, or that I've had like intense fear things. And I think as an officer, I know I'm pretty confident in a lot of like personal safety things, but I think in some parts of my personal life, I do have like responses where I go code black and I freeze and I don't know what to do. And it's been really, really hard when I'm in those situations to think of like, what do I do next? What do I do next? When I haven't even thought of it, there's a lot of things I haven't practiced. But I think what we're going to talk about today is really the practice and the mental state. And so where maybe I've made mistakes in my past, where I've kind of been injured, like, in a social situation, I've just given up. But if I practice like, hey, you make a mistake, you can keep going, you can get through this, that's how we kind of get through that. So we really want to push this mental state and the practice as we go. And Jim will talk about some things we can practice.
I was just chatting with Alan. He's going to close the door because we're going to get a little loud for a second. Is everybody ready to participate with me? All right, so one of the first things that we want to talk about is if something is happening to you where you feel uncomfortable or you feel unsafe, we want to draw attention to what's happening to us. There's a couple reasons for that, right? We want people around us to know what's happening so they can come to our aid or they can call 911 for us. But we also want the person who's involved in the situation to go away, right? We want them to stop what they're doing and leave. So one of the ways that we do that is by drawing attention to it. Now, we're going to practice this together, and I encourage you to be really loud and project, okay? So the words that we recommend saying when we want to draw attention is no, help, police, help, police. You're letting people around you know that you need help, you need the police, and you're being very clear that you are not pleased with what's happening to you, okay? Is everybody ready to shout with me? Okay, 1, 2, 3. No! Help! Police! Help! Police! All right, how'd that feel? Feels pretty good, right? I love to do this regularly because I feel like it's very empowering. It reminds us how loud we can be, and it also helps us to practice, right? Because Officer Roberson was just talking about that action versus reaction. If we've practiced this and planned ahead for using this, then we're much more likely to pull out this loud, empowering voice when we need to. Does that make sense? You have a question over here?
No, I want to say
Sure.
that the very first thing to do before you say anything is take a breath. Because when you take it, you go, no! When you take that breath, if you're stuck and you are kind of like this, no, it's not going to help. The first thing you want to do is take a deep breath and then scream on that breath. The voice goes on the breath.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. So our colleague over here was telling us that we want to make sure we take a big old deep breath before we do this. And that's a great suggestion. Thank you very much for sharing that. Because that also helps us to take a second to think, right? To get that big old breath so we can be really loud and empowered. So thank you.
All right.
Okay, so we'll move into this slide where we're going to talk a little bit about assertiveness. So depending on your personality or what you're familiar with, different people have levels of comfortability, right? So we want to talk about this concept of being rude versus saying no. And sometimes I think I'm kind of guilty of this myself. I don't always like to tell people no in like social settings. I think I'm really good at having these boundaries with work and, like when I'm the boss at coaching and things like that. But we have to know that it's really important to have our boundaries and to have them be respected. And it's not rude to assert your boundaries, okay? So if you say something similar to, hey, you're too close, please move away. Somebody, will say like a normal person, they're gonna respect that and they should move away, right? That's not rude, that's saying exactly what you want, and it should be given to you, right? But if somebody responds to you negatively, right, and they get mad or they get closer, that's information, right? That's things that we need to start planning through, like, hey, I told them something very reasonable, and now they're responding this other way, right? So I'm back into that condition orange. I'm starting to put some plans together. Hey, what do I need to do to remain safe in this situation? What do I need to do next? Who's around? Going through that kind of thinking again. And then I'll pass it back to Jim real fast.
I think one of the important things about assertiveness, and this is something I think can be particularly challenging for women, is think of assertiveness as a negative thing, right? We think of it as maybe as being bossy. But really, assertiveness is a very positive thing, and it's something that we need to practice. Because we have to set our own personal boundaries, because no one else can do that for us. And I think it's also important to remember that we have a right to say no at any time, regardless of the situation, right? So it doesn't matter if it's a coworker, a spouse, a friend, a neighbor, doesn't matter. We always have a right to say no at any time and let other people know what our boundaries are. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Where are we headed now, sir? There we go. I'm going to let Officer Roberson talk about this one.
Yeah, so if attacked, fight for your life. And so this is one of the things where I mentioned earlier about the mental state that is really, really important. So this first slide, or sorry, the first point talks about knowing and accepting that you may be injured within the first 15 seconds. So I think earlier I was kind of mentioning that sometimes in social situations, I get overwhelmed, I kind of like just give up, right? But we can't do this if we're in a fight, right? We have to have this thing that, hey, if I make a mistake, right, or if I get hurt, I'm not giving up, right? I'm gonna fight for everything I have, right? This is really, really important. So more important, I think, than physical stature is this mental state. But if we are, all the steps we tried to do, we tried to be aware, we tried to go through orange, planning, we went through condition red, we put our plan into action, everything else, for whatever reason, wasn't able to work in this situation, and now we're in a fight. So what we're gonna suggest is taking the fight to them, right? We need to be violent, and it needs to be quick and hard action. So going for soft targets, eyes, nose, throat, like in this area, is really good. The groin, we want to, so if it's male or female, it works, right? But with this mindset that we're fighting to win, and we're fighting for our life potentially, right? There's no rules. You don't have to follow like boxing, MMA, anything like that. You do what you need to do. If there's things next to you, you use them, and we get out of this situation, and then we figure out what we need to do next, right? And the last point we have on here is just kind of reminding people that if somebody's trying to take you away from where you're at, it's very, very important to make as much noise as you can, fight as hard as you can. Do not let yourself be taken to a second location, because the chances of something bad happening go astronomically up. If there's any points you got, okay. We'll go to the next one. And does anybody have questions so far?
Yes.
Yes.
This item here, these items,
Okay.
these items seem to be in contrast to the former one, which says, please go away.
Yeah.
I think the word please is too easy.
Well, the word is attack.
Thank you for that. So the question is, the last slide we had said, please move away, or setting our boundaries with the word please. This slide and sort of this topic is, as Officer Roberson said, if everything else that we've tried and practiced doesn't work, right? This is last worst case scenario, right? This is sort of if all the prevention strategies and everything we've already tried doesn't work and we're physically in an altercation. I think this is important to talk about because we often get questions about it, but this is not sort of our focus of today. Our focus is more on the prevention and awareness piece, right? But this is sort of, if all else fails.
I think the important point is if you're attacked, that's the main word.
Yes, so if you're attacked, right? This is if you're, sort of physically in that state.
Okay. Yep, go ahead.
Question?
Well, one easy way to kind of be ready for this, and we always have the weapons with us, are keys. I learned from the Seattle Police Department 40 years ago when I worked night shift at Harborview, carry my keys in between my fingers in my pocket, and you go for their nose and their eyes. When I was teaching in school and we were in lockdown for an active shooter in the area, I kept a bottle of 409 by my door because living 409 in the eyes is better than about anything. So a little spray bottle of 409 lemon in your pocket. It's not against the law and it hurts really bad.
Yeah.
So you can be prepared with simple things, not knowing you're always going to be attacked, but knowing you've got those things with you kind of make you more powerful in your mind.
Thank you so very much for that. And we will talk about weapons in a little bit. So we'll talk about what's legal to carry, and if you would like to carry a weapon, what you can and cannot carry, and all the kind of things to think about with that. But thank you so very much. The keys thing is a great idea. Holding your keys in between your fingers can be really helpful. Do you have a question over
No,
here?
I was going to follow on that, but you're going to be talking about.
Yes, we will. We will touch on weapons in a little bit, I promise. All right, so being prepared. Officer Roberson talked about this a little bit, but really we're going to fall back on the way we've prepared, whether that's good or bad, right? So kind of thinking about this with like a sports analogy, right? If we're a basketball player and in the big game we need to make a three-point shot, if we've never practiced the three-point shot, we're probably not going to make it, right? So we have to practice these things. And really, our mindset is just as important, if not more important, than any physical stature or skills we might have. So I think this is particularly important to think about, right? Because you can be a jiu-jitsu master and trained in self-defense, but if you haven't mentally prepared for what you're going to do in that situation, then you're never going to be able to pull out those skills because we're just going to go to condition black, right? We're just going to freeze and not know what to do. So really this training is, I think, this is one of the most important slides, is really getting that mindset that I'm going to be safe, I'm going to go home today, and I'm going to be okay. I think attending this training today is starting that mindset process, so good for everybody, and thank you very much for sort of starting that mindset process.
No, I mean, I guess I've been kind of touching on this a few different times, but I think it really is important. I think the mindset is where your money is at, so to speak. So we're going to move a little bit into safety tips on the street. So we could say, we're saying on the street, just out and about, you know, in the environments that you guys frequent. Being close to Green Lake, I don't know if people spend time out there, but that's what I'm kind of imagining in my head right now. So being aware of yourself and your surroundings. As we said, once we're leaving, we're conditioned yellow, and we're trying to be aware of our surroundings. Depending on the group, some people have more or less reliance on digital tools. And those are one of the biggest distractors that we see now, is people constantly using digital devices, if it's music or phones, things like that. So if we can limit those as we're out, that's what we're trying to suggest, right? Be familiar with your frequently used routes. So know the street you're on, the address, landmarks, numbers, all those kind of things. Oh, yep, you got something you want to add?
Quick question for you. Does anybody know the address of where we're located right now? Yeah? Anybody shout it out? Awesome. Excellent. So that's kind of one thing that Officer Roberson's talking about, right? Is knowing where you're at can be really, really important, and practicing that is also essential. Sorry for the interruption.
That's right. No, that's how teamwork works, right? All right. So I think, I ask people a lot. Usually the younger they are, the worse they are with the address, right? But the thing is, it's really important. I grew up in Seattle. I'm a police officer. I need to know how to get places. But when I became an officer, I didn't really know like streets and addresses very well. I knew how to get a lot of places, but it was landmark based. So I had to kind of learn something different. So if you yourself aren't great with it, you can learn it. If you're out walking every 10 minutes, you know, just kind of remind yourself, hey, where am I at? And just start checking whatever you need to check, streets, addresses, things like that. As far as when you're walking, if you have the choice, we'd like you to try to walk facing traffic. So that's where cars can't necessarily kind of be creeping behind you and, you know, stop, or you can't really be aware of what's happening. So if we could be on the other side of the road where cars are coming towards you, that's what we're going to prefer. If you need to walk alone, Try to walk in the middle of the sidewalks, giving yourself some time and some distance if something were to pop out from a car that's parked over here, something from like an alcove or a business that's closed, alleyway, things like that. We just want to limit the opportunity for something to happen by giving ourselves a little bit more space to react. Yeah, if you're going to an unfamiliar area, I don't know how much people rely on GPS, but if that's something you do rely on, look at the map ahead of time, because if it's not working, you still want to have an idea of where you're at. And not relying on phones and GPS is a very smart thing to do, to have other options.
All right, so continuing to talk about kind of safety tips when we're outside of our home, kind of on the street, we want to think about how we carry our belongings. And I'm one of those people that has that giant purse that has like everything that you ever might need in that purse, right? But I have to be aware of how I carry it. So, for example, so this is like my work bag, right? Has it very heavy, lots of things, right? But this is not how we want to carry it, right? Because it's open, nothing is sealed. It's easy for someone to just grab it like this. So I want to try to have it be closed, clasped closed if possible. And then cross my body like this. So that makes it a lot more difficult for someone to access my things or take it from me because of the way I'm carrying my belongings. Does that make sense? Okay.
All right, and that's a pretty big thing that we do see. So yeah, that's a good tip. There you go, Jen.
Consider clothing and shoes that you could run in or walk fast in. So sometimes I think about this with like if I'm dressed professionally and I'm wearing heels, I want to be aware of that I can't really run super fast if I'm wearing high heels. So thinking about maybe bringing an extra set of shoes if we can. Try to make eye contact with others while walking. So this shows confidence. This shows that I'm paying attention, right? That's very different than if I'm walking around with my phone like this, not paying attention, right? So we want to make eye contact, look around at those around us, show that confidence. If you suspect you're being followed, turn around, cross the street, do whatever you can to make yourself safe, and then we can address that later. Officer Roberson, do you want to talk about somebody we might not want to make eye contact with?
Sure. Yeah, this comes up, and I was doing a couple of these safety ones today. This came up twice already, but somebody you might not want to have that direct eye contact with is somebody that we'll call for today is in crisis. And so crisis I'll refer to as somebody who could be having some sort of like mental impairment episode, some sort of like drug influence episode, or it could be just an acute event. So they're just really mad or upset about something. Sometimes looking at these people in the eye will set them off. I don't know if anybody's experienced that before, but that's a reality. So we still want to be, as Jen said, not necessarily looking down and around, not paying attention. If we're kind of noticing somebody, we're in condition yellow, and we say, hey, maybe that's a person that I might not want to have a lot of eye contact. That doesn't mean that we're not going to watch them at all, right? We can look at the peripheral, kind of notice that they're there, but that direct eye contact that we're looking for usually might set them off. And so that's something to keep in mind.
Thank you, Officer Roberson. Never let anyone close the distance between you and them without your consent. So this kind of goes back to our personal boundaries, right? If someone has gotten too close to us, it's perfectly okay to say, you're too close, please step back. Sometimes one of our other presenters will say that she will like fake sneeze, like, oh my goodness, oh gosh, these allergies are just terrible, right? It's really funny during COVID, right? Because nobody wants any cooties. But if you fake cough or fake sneeze, somebody goes, oh my goodness, I don't want to hear that, right? Find whatever works for you in order to ask somebody to leave your space, but never let anybody get into your space without your consent. So that's something to think about. And then lastly is scream and yell, right? So as we practice no, help police, we want to make a scene. If someone is in our space, if they're making us uncomfortable, make a scene. Make them feel uncomfortable, make them want to leave our situation.
All right, does anybody ride the bus in here? All right, a little bit. Okay, and there are some North End stations that recently opened. So we'll talk about bus and light rail. If you're taking notes or anything like this, have fun with these. If you want to put in the transit security number, it's something that you can write down. It's 206-398-5268. I usually say that first because I always might forget that part. But you can call or text it, and that's the security. So that's not necessarily the police. But if there's something going on that you think that they might need to know about, that's the resource to use for that. But as far as buses and light rail, this is a place or a location in the city where there are a lot of incidents around major transportation routes. So while you're waiting, if possible, can we put our backs, close to a wall, right? So that nobody can get behind us, and we can limit the amount of real estate that we have to pay attention to. So 180 degrees is a lot better than 360. If you have valuables, so this could be like jewelry, things like that, do you want to consider tucking things in? If you have like electronics, things like that you might want to be working on, can we just stow those and keep them away, right? We don't want to necessarily flash the valuables so people see what's happening. What typically will happen with that is a suspect might see somebody using a computer or whatever and wait for a stop. When the door opens up, they run by, snatch the thing, get out real fast. And typically, the victim can't really do anything about that. They weren't planning to get off or do anything about that. So we get a lot of those snatch and run type of robberies that happen on light rail lines. But if you are having issues with somebody, you can always try to notify the driver. That's a really good option. All your valuables we want to keep in your close possession, so like in your lap. You can still wear it across your body if it's something that has a strap between your legs, like in your possession, so that it's never kind of out of sight, out of mind. And we talked about conditions, and we have a point about not falling asleep on the bus or the light rail. When we're talking to teenagers, it was very apparent that some of them did sleep on the bus, but their level of awareness is below daydreaming, right? If you're not even conscious. So we need you to be conscious. Please stay awake. If you need to stand up to help yourself stay awake, I think please stand up because we want to be thinking about our own safety. And the last thing is, Jen mentioned way in the beginning about listening to your gut, right? And so if you see something at a stop, and maybe it's your normal stop, and it doesn't feel like a safe situation, like, hey, this just doesn't feel right, please listen to your gut, get off at the next stop, and make a plan from there. So don't force yourself to be in a position that you don't think is safe, just because this is normally what I do, right? And I'll pass it back to you.
Can I ask a question?
Sure, of course.
If you're on the light rail,
If you're on the light rail, it's not possible to notify the driver, is that correct?
That is correct. There is no driver on the light rail, correct?
Yes,
This is driver.
Oh, there is?
yeah.
Oh, I've never sat on the very, very front. So-
I personally can tell you, I saw them at that station, the opening of the Northgate station.
Excellent. Please disregard my answer.
No problem. I even waved to her with my daughter.
Oh, excellent. So yes, there is a driver on the light rail. They're at the very, very front of the car.
Yes.
And so the option to notify that person is, if we don't use the number that you gave us, is to walk to the front of the train?
Yes. Or when you get on the train, to sit near the driver, or on a bus, to sit near the bus driver, yes. So that's important to think about too, is where we sit on the bus or light rail, right? I know that, back in the day it wasn't cool to sit in the front of the bus, but I think that sitting in the front of the bus is better because we have closer access to the driver to let them know if something's going on. So same with the light rail. If you can sit in the front of the car closer to the driver, that gives us somebody to talk to right away. And what's really great about bus and light rail in the city of Seattle is oftentimes that driver will actually have a direct line of communication to our dispatch center. So they can let us know immediately that something is going on, and they can either contact Sound Transit Security or SPD to get them out there on that train.
Also,
Question in the back?
if you call the security number,
If you call the security number, I think I was told that they contact the driver and SPD.
Yeah.
And so the driver will know whether you get there or not. They have contact with the drivers.
Yes. Yep, so if something's going on, the driver should be notified so that they can either stop or assist you if possible, depending on the situation. But yes, if you call the Sound Transit security number, call or text, they will get in touch with the proper authorities, whether that be law enforcement or the driver, depending on the situation.
All right.
All right, we'll talk a little bit about walking, jogging, running. I thought this was important because we're right on Green Lake. So who walks and jogs Green Lake pretty often? Awesome. It's probably a wonderful source of exercise and great people watching, I imagine. But one of the first things I want to bring your attention to, and Officer Roberson talked about this a little bit ago, is trying to keep our cell phones and our electronic devices put away. I know that this is hard because I personally like to listen to music when I walk or jog, but when we do that, we're taking away some of our awareness, right? We can't hear if someone's coming up behind us. We can't hear if someone maybe fell and needs some help. We can't hear if somebody is running up behind us to try to steal our bag, right? So one of the first things I suggest is if you can, take the headphones off, leave your ears open to hear what's going on around you for your safety and for other safety as well. Try to always carry a cell phone with you. I know this sounds kind of obvious, but always make sure you have a cell phone and that it's charged, because we want to make sure that you can call 911 for yourself or for someone else if something is happening, right? Try to vary your routine. So if you're one of those people like me that runs every morning at 9:30 or whatever it may be, right? We run outside, we go to the right every single time. That gives someone the opportunity to figure out what our routine is, which is something we don't want to do. So if we can vary it up a little bit, whether that's time of day or day of the week, try to vary it up a little bit. Try to always know your location. I know we've said this a couple times in different contexts, but it's very, very important if you ever need to call 911 that you know where you are. The second question they're always going to ask is, where are you? So please be sure to get into a habit of sort of trying to memorize or challenge yourself to figure out where you're at. And then last one is, if you're tech savvy and would like to consider sharing your location with other people, that means that you could share your location. Say, for example, I share my location with Matt, so he knows that I'm on a run, and when I get home, he can see that I've made it home safe. So that's something you can consider doing as well.
All right, so for this one, we have shopping malls, parking lots, but we also just kind of think in general just like vehicles parking too. So as far as where you're at, usually there'll be security of some sort, and almost all these securities want people to use them to walk them to their cars. So know that that's a resource that you can ask for, and they'll walk you to your car. Not a lot of people do it, but it's one of their jobs, and I think I had a job kind of like that in college that I barely ever got to do, but when someone would ask me to walk them somewhere, it'd be really exciting because it doesn't happen that often. But if possible, right, we want to pick some good spots to park, right? And so let's try to park in well-lit spots, and that helps for a variety of reasons. We can see what's around our car, people, objects, whatever it is, we can see it. And so this is one of the things too, if it's daytime when you're parking, thinking a little bit, what will this look like if it's evening when I come back to my vehicle, right? And if it's in an area that may not have lights, maybe you consider parking somewhere a little bit different so that when you come back, it feels a little bit safer. I know you mentioned earlier about having your keys ready, and so that's one of the things that we do want people to have their keys in their hand, ready. I have a system that I do. I know Jen has a system that she uses. Figure out a system that's consistent with you so that when you get to your car, you know exactly, you have your keys, and you can get into your car immediately. You don't have to look in different pockets, into bags, figuring out where your keys are. Because while you're doing that, you're distracted, and your awareness is not what it needs to be in those moments. For a little while in South Seattle, we're having an issue with a lot of carjackings happening in parking lots where people would be getting into their cars and not really paying attention to what's going on around them, sometimes loading groceries and things like that, and then somebody just come up and take them out of their car and take the car. So we don't want things to happen like that. So one way we can limit that from happening is once you get into your car, you can lock the door, right? And this is a habit that I'd say I'm like 50-50 on right now, as far as like getting in and just locking the door, right? You know, it's something that I'm learning too, and it takes a little bit to get used to, but it makes sense. Hey, I'll get in, lock the door. If somebody wanted to do something, they're going to be fumbling with the handle, and I at least have a little bit more time to come up with something, right? They're not already in my car and have to come up with a plan right then and there. I think, yeah, we just have to kind of be really cognizant of what we're leaving in our cars. So, like, if there's anything of value in sight, we don't want that to happen. Even if it's not of value in sight, sometimes people don't know what it is. So if it's a bag or a box and a suspect doesn't know what's in it, they still might break the window, take it out, and then figure out it's just trash. But it doesn't matter after that point, they just throw it away, but you're out of window. And so if possible, let's try to leave as much valuables at home that we can. If you have to take it with you, can you take it into the place that you're going? Or if you can't take it into the place you're going, locking it in the trunk, locking it out of sight. Those are the things that we want to cover for parking related issues.
Excuse me,
Sure, question, Matt?
something I read recently, you know, with our electronic openers, with our doors beyond amusing keys, that there are groups that know how to hack those. And so before getting in your car, you should actually look in your car and make sure nobody's in it before you get in it. Because that's been happening. I don't know about the Seattle area, but I know in other areas that's been an issue.
So, thank you so much for bringing that up. That is possible, and it has happened a couple of times in Seattle. Basically, what is happening is if you have an electronic lock or unlock to your car, a little fob, it has a signal. And someone who knows what they're doing can hack that signal and open your car. So my personal vehicle was broken into this way. I have video of the person walking up to my car with some kind of device in their hand, pushing a couple buttons, and then opening my door. It's a scary situation, and it's something we don't want to happen, but really the way we try to prevent that is by leaving nothing in our cars that would entice them to want to get into our car, and then being aware when we walk to our car, kind of just taking a little glance to make sure that there's nothing suspicious about our car. So when I walk to my car, I just kind of glance a little bit, into the back seat and the front seat before I get in to make sure that there's nothing else going on, right? And if there is someone in our car, of course, we don't want to get into the car, and we want to step back and call 911 and let officers kind of take care of that. Okay, but thank you very much for bringing that up. I want to talk a little bit about ride share. Does anybody use ride share regularly? I use ride share a lot. And I think it's kind of funny. I think when we were kids, we were taught to never get in a car with a stranger. Now we're paying to get into a car with a stranger, right? So I think that there's some important things to kind of consider. One of the first things is being aware of where you sit in the car, especially if you're by yourself. So I personally like to sit behind the passenger seat. That way I can see the driver, I can see their hands, I can see what they're doing up there, but they don't have easy access to me, right? They kind of have to lean back and at a diagonal to try to get to me. So that gives me time to react. It's kind of a variety of different things here. One of the things I want to also point to is child locks. So this is a new one that I've seen recently, that if you get into a car, if you're familiar with a child lock, it basically means that you can't open the door from the inside of the car. Right? So if something's happening, you want to be able to get out fast. So what I suggest is if you're getting into a ride share, that you sit down, roll down the window, and check the door to make sure that it opens. If it doesn't open, you can reach through the open window and open the door from the outside. And then tell the driver, your child locks are engaged, please disengage them. Okay? A couple other things here. Make sure you share your rides with friends. So if you're getting in a car by yourself, make sure to let somebody know, hey, I'm getting into a ride share, I'm planning to be at this location at this time, and then let somebody know when you've arrived safe.
All right, so yeah, back to the topic that we talked about a little bit earlier. So going a little bit more into weapons. So these are considerations that people can have. And I'm gonna refer back to what I said before about more than like weapons and physical stature, the mental state that you're in, like your preparedness and awareness is more important than like these tools. And so with that said, if you're considering carrying any of these, so something like a taser, a stun gun, pepper spray, knives, guns, things like that, you have to really ask yourself, am I willing to use this in the way that it's intended? So with a firearm, that means I could potentially take somebody's life with this tool. Am I willing to do that? If the answer is no, or it's maybe, and you probably shouldn't do it, right? But if your answer is yes for whatever reason it is, then we're going to suggest that you need to be trained on it, very proficient, so regularly train on it, know all the laws associated with whatever you're picking, and stow it safely, right? So it's locked away, safe, so that nobody else can access it unless it's just you. We have a different variety of them. Tasers, stun guns, pepper spray, those are like ranged tools. So they'll give you some distance to use them. But I think I've heard this a lot of different times. People want to use pepper spray a lot, but if I ask them where do you keep your pepper spray, it's usually not anywhere that they can actually access. And so you have to understand that if you're carrying this and it's in the bottom of like a bag like Jen's,
That's not good, right?
not to say there's anything wrong with your bag, but if it's in the bottom of a bag, we're not gonna use it. Like we're not gonna use it in that time of need. So is there somewhere that you can carry it on you that you'll actually reach for and use in that time of need? So this means you have to practice. You buy one that you're going to use and one that you can practice with. See what happens. How far does it spray? What happens if it gets on you? How are you going to react? Those are things you need to think of. If it's used in an enclosed space like this, it will likely get other people too, right? There's central air. We've been kind of talked about that. And it gets in the system and everybody's impacted. So you have to think about those. But yeah, there's different rules around knives, sometimes locations, firearms, you can't bring them on. So we need to really do your homework on what you're considering carrying. And what we said way back in the beginning is that there's always weapons of opportunity. So if something were to happen, and the closest thing to me is this computer, and I'm trying to protect myself, I might use the computer to help protect myself. There's no rule against that. That's just what I have. If I could throw a computer at somebody and keep them away from me, it's better than letting them close that distance, right? But Jen is going to talk about some really cool tools that we do recommend, and they don't necessarily have to follow the traditional ones that people think of.
All right, so one of the first ones I'm going to talk about is this little metal object. Has anybody ever seen one of these before? It's called a Kubaton. I'm going to pass it around so you can play with it if you want to. So it's just a metal pressure point object. So basically it's kind of pokey on the end. It's not going to like break skin, right? It doesn't scratch me. But if I were to push this hard into someone's skin, right, those soft targets that Officer Roberson talked about earlier, this is very, very uncomfortable. Another great thing about this is it also works as a window break. So if you're in a situation where you need to break glass, this will break glass for you. I love this object because it was $2, and it's a keychain, right? So I have one of these on both my sets of keys, my work keys and my personal keys. I have this little object. Yes?
How do you spell it?
I can spell it for you. Kubaton, a Kubaton. But there's all different kinds of shapes. So here's one. I'm going to pass this one around. You can play with it if you want to. This other one is kind of a fun little shape, right? And this one I can put my fingers into. And it's very similar to, kind of like brass knuckles, but not really, because brass knuckles are illegal. But this is just another pressure point device, right? So it's on my keys. So kind of like that idea of holding your keys in between your fingers. When I walk to my car, I hold my keys like this. Because if I needed to use this to break glass or to use as a personal self-defense device, I can. And what I love about these kinds of devices is they're very simple. They're something that we're probably going to carry with us anyway, right? Like our keys. Like Officer Roberson was saying, we want our keys to be ready with us when we head to the car. So I'm already going to have it in my hand, and it's something that just helps me to feel a little safer. I'm not going to pass this one around because it's on my personal keys, but that one's a little keychain. Yeah.
So where do you find those? Where do you get those?
Thank you. My question is, where do we find these? So one of the things I love about that one, the really simple kind of pen-looking one, is they're very, very cheap. If you search on Google or on Amazon, they're just a couple dollars. You can buy them in big sets. So for example, I buy them for all the ladies in my life around the holidays, right? I buy 20 of them and pass them out to all my friends. Because everybody wants to have one of these, right? So you can find them online, or you can also sometimes find them at places like a sporting goods store, like Big Five or Cabela's or something like that. Somewhere you'd also find pepper spray is probably somewhere you'd also find an object like this. Like I said, that one that's going around over there is called a Kubaton, so K-U-B-A-T-O-N. But if you just look for pressure point devices, there's all kinds of different shapes and things that I think are fun. There's one that looks like a cat, the little cat ears. Those are kind of fun. The stick kind of one I think is really comfortable and easy to carry because it kind of has spots for your fingers, so it makes it pretty comfortable to carry. And like I said, if you wanted to purchase a bunch of them, you can pass them out to other people in your life. One other thing I want to point to on this slide, has anybody ever seen one of these purple objects that's on the slide?
Yes, I have one.
Yeah.
It's in my purse. I didn't bring it here.
Yes, excellent. So this is what's called a personal alarm. And basically what it does is if I pull this little pin out, it emits a 105 decibel siren. And that's pretty stinking loud. What's great about that is if we ever get into that condition black, where we freeze and we can't use our voice, that can be a voice for us. So it lets other people around us that something's happening and I need help. I also like these, just like the Kubaton. Search for this on Amazon or on Google. It's a couple dollars a piece. They're really, really simple, and most of them have just like that little pin you pull out and it makes a noise, and you put the pin back in and it stops. It's also great, worst case scenario, you hold that up to someone's ear, that can burst an eardrum. So it is another option as letting people know something's happening, and also could be used as a weapon as well. Question over here?
Answer the question. You can put it back.
Yes. Yeah, you can put it back in, so you can reuse them. Any other questions about weapons? Yes.
Thank you. I don't have a question, but this was given to me by my family a year ago.
Yes.
And it's amazing.
It's a birdie.
It's the birdie. And
it's a brand
you
name.
put it on just hang it on your belt buckle or whatever you hang on. And then you just simply pull this. I mean, it's really loud.
It's loud.
So somebody comes up and you pull that down. The nice thing about this is it has a strobe light on it.
Yep.
So not only is it this huge sound, but it has this light that really flashes. So if it's at night, people can identify where you are.
Oh.
Can I look at it?
Yeah.
I'll show it to the
You said it
camera.
was called Birdie?
It's called a birdie, and it's great. College girls carry that with them. And they gave me that, and I pulled it over at the Cove one night, and it was really loud. I was showing it to some friends, and really loud. I could show it to you now, but if you want to hear it.
It's up to you whether you'd like to or not.
Would you like to hear it? Or not? Because
So we're going to have a test. If anybody does not want to hear the very loud siren, go ahead and cover your ears. It's pretty loud.
It has its light.
So what?
Make it stop.
Good luck.
I never had to use it. There's a little pin there's a little pin.
Sorry, everybody.
Thank you so very much for showing that. That's one version of the personal alarm that I'm talking about. There's lots of different kinds. There's different prices, different sizes. Some have strobe lights like that, some do not. But one of the things I love about that sound is it's very unique, right? That sounds like somebody needs help. It's not a car alarm, it's not a phone. That tells you somebody needs help. And I really like that aspect of it. So I think in terms of weapons, right, Officer Roberson said there's all different kinds, and, all different things that we can think about, but a personal alarm and a pressure point device are really what I suggest as kind of a baseline, really easy that most people can feel comfortable with, and something that are relatively cheap and easy to access to. So that's something to think about. Okay, we're going to talk a little bit about calling or texting 911. Does everybody know that you can text 911 in the city of Seattle? No? All right, good. I have an opportunity. So, you can text 911 in the city of Seattle. Now, something to keep in mind is what we suggest is to call if you can and text if you can't. So texting 911 is most appropriate for a situation where it's unsafe to speak or where you can't speak. So for example, if you're having a medical episode or something is happening to you where it's unsafe to talk about it. For example, we're talking to young people if they're witnessing domestic violence in their home to text 911 because they can let 911 know something's happening without the person involved knowing that they've called 911. So that's something to keep in mind. You would just text the numbers 911 in a text message. But one of the first things, I know we've hit this home quite a few times, but really we always have to know where we are. So does anybody have a landline in their unit? Does everybody have a landline? Most people. So something to remember is if you call 911 from a landline, we will know where you are. We have your address. But if you call from a cell phone, we do not know where you are. It's kind of a common misconception that it's like the movies or the cop shows where we can pinpoint exactly where you're located. Our technology is just not that good. So it's always important to know where you are when you call 911 because we need to know that. Allow the call taker to guide the conversation. If you've ever called 911 before, you know that there's a million stinking questions, and sometimes it can get kind of frustrating, right? You're thinking like, goodness gracious, stop asking me these questions, just send me a police officer. But every question matters because all that information is getting to the officers that are on their way to you already. So just try to remain calm and answer all the questions. Don't hang up, so stay on the line until the call taker tells you to hang up. If you'd like contact from the responding officers, be sure to let the call taker know that, to say, I'd like them to come talk to me, or call me, or I want to remain anonymous. I don't want to talk to the officers at all. You can do that too. And then lastly, I encourage everybody to write down this non-emergency number if you don't have it already, because it's good to have that number just in case.
Okay. All right, we're coming towards the end of the presentation where we'll have a little bit of time for some questions. But there's some other resources, depending on what you're familiar with and what you like to use technology-wise, that you can kind of get some information on. I think there's, you have the cards in the back. I think one that I would like to highlight out of here is Smart 911. This is a service that you can do to sign your phone number up. It basically put information that would pop up on a 911 call taker screen once you call from that number. And so you can put landlines, cell phones, and say like, hey, this is my address, this is who lives with me, these are medical conditions that somebody might want to be aware of, animals that live with me, kids, etc. So this kind of helps like the place you work, you can put all sorts of information in there because, as Jennifer mentioned earlier, maybe there's a time you can't talk, right? There's something going on. We have some information on the screen, and so maybe we have a couple addresses that officers would check. When we get a 911 hang-up call, we are going to send somebody out to that. Somebody will go until we determine it was not an emergency. So as far as that, there's a lot of other things that you can get depending on what you want, but I think Smart 911 is a really good option to look into.
So if you Just Google Smart 911, is that? where-
Yes. So there's a little card on the back table back here that's called Smart 911, and it has all the information of how you can sign up. And one of the things I think is really important about Smart 911 is for a building like this. So for example, if you call 911 and you say, I live at Hearthstone, where? Right? How do I get to you? What is the proper door to use? Is there a code I need to use to get in? How do I get to you? And if you're having a medical or criminal emergency, we want officers to get to you as quickly as possible, right? So this can help to save time when you're on the phone saying, look at my Smart 911 profile, it has all the information about how to access me. So I think that this is a really, really great resource. There is an app or a website, depending on how comfortable you are with that. There's different options for how to sign up, but I highly, highly recommend that you take a look at Smart 911. And feel free to let us know if you have any questions about that. All right, we're almost there. Thank you for sticking it out with us. This little slide is about crime prevention coordinators. This is my role with the Seattle Police Department. And I just wanted to do a quick little plug that if you're not familiar with who your crime prevention coordinator is, then I recommend that you find out. Here in the North Precinct, which is where we're located, the city of Seattle is broken into 5 precincts, and this is the North Precinct. The North Precinct does not currently have a crime prevention coordinator, but she is in our background process. Hopefully she will be hired very, very soon. But she's a great resource for questions. So if you get to Smart 911 and you think, oh my gosh, this is so confusing, I don't know how to do this, you can contact your crime prevention coordinator and she can help you fill that out. So this is just little information about kind of what we do. We do things like this, right? Personal safety conversations. We run our National Night Out. Is anybody familiar with National Night Out? Pretty awesome program, which I really like to do. That's part of our role with the police department, is really community outreach and crime prevention. Yes, we also have a program that we do called Drug Take Back. Is anybody familiar with this program? Yeah, in the back, awesome. So what Drug Take Back is we have an event coming up next Saturday the 23rd, where you can bring unused medication that you would like to get rid of. And we'll take it, no questions asked, and have it destroyed. And what's really important about that is we want to make sure that you don't have any expired or unused medications that somebody else might have access to that shouldn't, right? So young people or pets, or if someone breaks into your home and they steal medications and then, that kind of thing. So if you have any unused or expired medications that you're looking how to get rid of, we have a drug take back and we'll take it all back. You have a question over here? No? Okay. All right, we're almost there, I promise. Okay, I'm gonna let Officer Roberson do our summary slide and then we'll take some questions.
Okay, so Jennifer does a great job putting a lot of this stuff together, and so drug take back is one of the things that she's been working on. So hopefully, maybe we'll get some information and remind people that if you have something, we would like to take it and make sure it doesn't get into anybody else's hands that it's not supposed to. So what we do want to do, as I've been kind of saying before, is that there are a lot of things we talked about today that we want to practice. And so as far as changing habits, learning new things, it typically takes about 3 weeks or 21 days to get something into your wheelbox that you can start referring to and make it feel a little bit more natural, right? So we want to practice being aware of our environment, playing that what if game. So this is like condition orange. We saw something, now we're saying, hey, what if this happens? What am I going to do? So that we have good reactions to situations. Listen to your intuition, listen to your gut. And this is one of the biggest things, that if something doesn't seem right, don't ignore those feelings, right? Be curious about them, ask questions, and really sit with them and figure out what you need to do to make yourself safe. I hope you guys practice yelling, no, help police, help police. I think it's really empowering, as Jen said earlier, to kind of know how loud you can get if you need to. We talked about making eye contact in situations where you might want to and some that maybe you don't. And then we didn't get a lot into this yet, but this is something we can practice giving descriptions. So like we're seeing things happen, people, their clothing, special marks, things like that. When we're paying attention, we also should be able to describe some of the people that we're seeing too. So I appreciate you guys asking questions as we go. But yeah, so we wanted to kind of open it up for a little bit and see what people want to talk about. And Jennifer, your information on the next
I
slide.
have a question. I have a question back here, actually. Are we ready for questions?
Yes, we are.
Yes.
Yeah.
I did want to mention shoes. No people's shoes. I learned that as a city employee up in Everett. That
Yeah.
people change their looks, but their shoes usually stay the same.
In the middle of a crime, yeah, might shed the top. They never really change their shoes. They'll use the same shoes in lots and lots of crimes, and we'll figure it out.
So I have two questions.
This is on.
It is.
One is, if you look around, you see a lot of people with walkers. How do they defend themselves with a walker?
So,
Can you go over that?
yeah, so I guess, well, we can even ask, like, if anybody has suggestions so far, right, something that they've used. But I think a walker in a situation, depending on what it is something that you could use to give yourself a little bit of a barrier between you and somebody else, if that makes sense, right? So if we can keep it kind of positioned, you know, this is the thing, we can't necessarily give like very, very specific advice, but I do think a walker in itself could help keep a barrier between you and somebody else, right? I don't know if anybody has suggestions what they may have used their own for.
Well, I have one more
Okay.
thing I want to ask.
But
while
I
have
think,
the mic.
yeah, I think you guys are a really good resource for each other too.
So, with the lack of police in the area, you might call 911 and wait an hour. What do? You do just lay there and say, Elizabeth, I'm coming to join you?
Yeah, I can talk for you guys. So depending on what happened, right, we're going to try to get officers there as fast as possible. So if this is a crime against a person, right, like a person is being assaulted, robbed, something like that, we're going to get officers there very fast. We still will respond to our priority 1 crimes within like 5 to 7 minutes, okay? Sometimes faster. But we're still able to make those goals, and so there is some issues with like officer numbers, and we're addressing it where normally I'm in a follow-up unit, I'm doing community outreach, but today it said everybody, you're coming to work with all your gear. If we need you, you're going to get deployed. So we're not going to let service get disrupted. We will respond to those person calls as fast as possible. So you will not have to lay there for an hour calling for Elizabeth. We're going to be there, okay?
And one of the things with that is very important to remember is when you're calling 911, we want you to be very explicit about what's happening and how you feel about what's happening. So for example, there's someone over there that makes me feel uncomfortable is very different than someone is threatening me, I don't feel safe, right? Those are very different priorities and a very different response from us. So we want you to be really, really explicit, right? Someone has threatened me, someone has entered my space, I've told them to leave, they're not leaving, I don't feel comfortable. That helps us to prioritize the call to figure out how fast officers need to come, right? So if you've been assaulted, if you're laying on the ground and you need help, that's a priority 1. That means officers are coming, lights and sirens as fast as they can to get to you, okay? So while there are some staffing challenges right now, and I'm sure you've heard about this in the news, that there's all kinds of things happening with our police department, that doesn't mean that we're not going to respond to you, right? If it's something that's a lower priority, so for example, you come out in the morning and realize that someone has stolen your package. So that's going to be a pretty low priority if the situation is already done, right, and our personal safety is not at risk. But that still means officers are still going to respond, right? It just might take a little bit. So I hope that answers your question, that generally speaking, priority 1, we're still going to come really fast, and we just want you to be really explicit about what's happening, where you are in relation to what's happening, and sort of if you don't feel safe, let us know that.
Okay, and you should also mention if there's a weapon. That gets the police over real fast.
Yes, for sure. And that is one question that the call takers will ask in almost every single call is, do you see a weapon? Be very explicit about that. If they have a baseball bat, if they have a knife, if they have a gun, if they have something that they are using or could use as a weapon, be sure to tell the call taker that and be explicit about where it is and how you feel about that. Because that can help the officers that are coming in to know what they need to be prepared for, right? If someone has a gun, officers need to know that. So when they come in, they can be prepared to respond to that as necessary.
Okay, and we have just a couple more minutes, so we'll have a few more questions real quick.
I am 79 years old. I come from New York City, where we did not have any of these techniques.
Sure.
But we knew how to take care of ourselves. I was walking Green Lake the other day, because I walk Green Lake every day, and I was walking it, but it was so cold, I did not go on Green Lake. I stayed on the outside, on Green Lake Way, on the north side, and I was walking, and suddenly, this man came out. He came from one of the houses behind a bush and yelled at me, "You bitch!" And he was really angry. I just looked at him and you know what I did? I found a path that took me out to the middle of Green Lake Way. And I thought the first car that comes by, I will stop and say, I need help. I will be using my hands. Because this man, I was alone on the street. The other thing that, so this is, I said, walking in the middle of the street, if you need help, is wonderful. I mean, where the cars are. They'll see you, and we don't move as fast as you guys, you know.
We're doing something like this, we'll get.
That's right, and you were talking about heels, forget it, none of us wear heels. I'm Puerto Rican, and I wore heels all my life, and those days are over. So that doesn't apply to us. The other thing that I want to say is that if you're walking and you're alone, if you talk to yourself, we would do that in New York and everybody would totally hear that. So these are great things. I had a friend who would say, today would be a terrible day to kill somebody and put them in the trunk of your car because they would smell right away. You do something outrageous, people will leave you alone.
Thank you very much for that.
And I think we have time for one more question before we need to bring the next crowd in. Anybody have something?
Alan, it's not a question, but somebody mentioned a lot of us have walkers.
Yeah.
And it's still something that I can keep between us. And I can run at you too.
Yep.
I can run at you, then run like hell.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah, the walker moves nice and fast with those wheels.
Yeah, some of them
it can be
harder
electric.
front than this one does, but still it's something between us.
Thank you for demonstrating that. And everybody, thank you so much for spending a little time with us. We hope this was helpful. There's a couple handouts on the back table. Please feel free to grab some. There's also a stack of my business cards. Please grab one of my business cards, so if something comes up later, you think, oh crap, I forgot to ask that question, you can reach out to me or Officer Roberson directly, and we can answer your questions, okay? Thank you, everybody.
Okay, thank you.
I assume that